Are y'all comfortable? We hope wherever you're listening to this, you're comfortable. This show is for the BIPOC communities in Oregon, hosted by a Black woman, about the amazing work we do every day in this state. So let's build together, connect with our communities, add some laughter and humor, even when it's a difficult conversation. Let's boost our voices.
The fact that there are younger people out there that are trying and they actually care. And knowing that, we are almost taught to think that it's not that big a deal, that those aren't the important elections, don't even worry about it. But at the end of the day, those are the little things that change the bigger machine. So just get involved. And if it doesn't seem like it's working, it's not to withdraw.
Welcome back, y'all, to a brand new episode of Boosting Our Voices. As always, I am your host, Ira O'Donovan, and I am also Boost Oregon's Diversity Program Director. We have two amazing guests on our show today, Sumi Krishnan and Jiang. Do you guys want to share a little bit about yourselves before we get into some conversation?
Hi, everyone. My name's Sumi. I'm super excited to be here. Thank you for having us. I've always been super passionate about social justice and really the intersection of social justice and civic engagement with art and music, because my first passion has always been being a singer-songwriter and performer. And whenever, since my earliest memory, I've been singing and dancing in the kitchen, and much to my parents' horror, who wanted me to go down a traditional path of being an engineer, a doctor, or a lawyer. So anyways, it sort of came full circle when a couple of years ago, I decided to pursue my passion as a singer-songwriter, but still had the desire to make an impact with that. And, just throughout history, there's such a overlap of social impact and activism with art and music, right? And so it's been really cool to be part of this project with the Slants Foundation to amplify the impact of our many and much needed social justice causes through music.
My two main loves in the creative world, which is basically my two main loves in general, are filmmaking and making music. And since I was probably in middle school, I've been just interested in creating stuff. And it was never, maybe at one point, just to convince my mom that I'm not wasting my life, that it was a career decision to go into filmmaking, or to music was never even an option. I was never good enough to say I was ever going to become a real musician. So she knew that and I knew that. But making videos, it was like, oh, that could be a job. So since middle school, I was always talking about I wanted to make things. I wanted to be a director, a filmmaker. And then at some point, the love of music, which I always been in love with music, also kind of creeped in. So right out of, I think, high school, I decided for 1 minute that I was like, maybe I could be a musician. I learned instruments. My mom supported me learning music, but at the beginning was mostly playing piano and, the Chinese or Asian traditional instruments. But at some point I picked up a guitar, and she actually did buy me my first acoustic. So I'm never going to say my mom discouraged me from learning music. And just parallel, I was making videos, I was making short films in school, in high school, into college, and I was always making music on the side. Neither of which I ever expected to truly make a living from. And I definitely never thought about true impact as far as impacting a bigger audience. I used to make CDs just for my friends. I will make an entire album worth of music, share it with 3 people, and that was good for me. And if one person liked it, I did my job. That was great. It wasn't until years of just doing the starving artist thing and trying to make weirdo movies, I met up with Simon Tam and joined his band, the Slants, that I got to see what being a musician was like in the real world, where I get to tour and see the world and play music for people that actually wanted to hear my music or hear us play music. And then at the same exact time, it was during the court case that Simon went through with the Supreme Court, and I started to see the actual impact of social justice work and how I can combine playing music, talking to an audience, and bring in that side of the more important side of the work that we do. And after the band retired, we decided to start the Slants Foundation, which I joined on board as the vice chair. And all these projects that we're promoting now and we're trying to push out into the next years, they're all part of that idea of moving from an artist to an activist, and sometimes doing both at the exact same time and inspiring other people to do the same thing.
I think it's really amazing that you decided to take the step to join a band and to actually go touring and do that kind of thing. Because a lot of people have the idea or the dream that they want to do music, they want to do art, they want to just make comic strips, whatever it is, and fear or whatever it is can get in the way of that. So it's good that you actually like took the step to go and do that and see, even if I just make one person happy that's a friend of mine, that's good enough for me.
That was good enough for me. And honestly, that still is good enough for me. If I never write another song for bigger audience, and the Slants never truly had a huge audience, it was always, we're still very independent, regardless of how it may seem from the news articles that might come out and the stories that have come out. We're a small band. But even if it goes back to just me writing or recording songs on like a tape recorder at home and sharing it with a couple of friends, I'm still okay with that. I just started to understand the impact of what that music could be, and if you have the opportunity in the platform, what you can use it for. So that's what I've learned from Simon. And honestly, getting past that fear of, oh, is this good enough, or should I even try to do this? Learning from Simon's experiences, no, you're always going to have to go out and try the best that you can and get it in front of people.
Really, you really do. And I had a great meeting with Simon prior to this podcast recording, and he's a really dope person, and he gave me so much more information about the Slants and the Slants Foundation. And I love the intersectionality between music, art, and activism. I think that's all really important. And there's not a lot of, I can't name any other bands that are doing that and also have a foundation to back it up. So I really do love that. And I know that you've both come a long way with your careers in fighting to make the world a better place. So can you talk with us about the build up to the creation of the Slants Foundation and what led you to start that?
At the end of 2018, and this was after the Supreme Court case that Simon went through, I think as a band, we all just realized, it was getting to be a slog, especially touring as an independent band. Simon was pretty much floating the band from working a bunch of jobs and doing all the booking and managing, as well as playing in the band and working on the music. And after the court case, he was also pretty worn out. So we've always kind of talked about what would the next step be for the band. At some point, we're 40-year-old people touring. We're not the Rolling Stones. We're not going to be able to do this for another 40 years, or at least not the capacity of just getting in a bus and driving around the country. That's just not, it doesn't work. So we talked about, well, let's use whatever cachet we have, whatever platform we have to help the next generation of artists. And during even just touring the early years of the Slants, before I even joined the band, so I joined in 2015. Before then, Simon's had already done these outreach to younger artists and just Asian American youth in general, seeing people on stage that reflected them more so than the other bands that were out in the world. And he always thought of it as, what can we pass on? And there were master classes that we were doing. There were just general support of younger artists. So the Slants Foundation was basically a way for us to say, let's just channel all our energy into saying, here's resources, here are some things that we can mentor others in doing. But on top of it, we're going to bring in artists like Sumi and activists like Sumi who can also bring a different perspective, because it can't just be the dudes in the band that we're limited by our own experience. So we wanted to bring other folks, and then the foundation, I think, was already brewing in Simon's head. But once we got that ball rolling in the 2018, early 2019, it was very, very quick to bring in people. Let's try to raise some funds. Let's pump a little money into it ourselves and start building projects out. And at the time, it was just what could be projects that worked. Simon had some ideas for scholarships. We all had different projects and programs that we might want to try. And as a group of volunteers, it was a hit or miss on what ended up making it to the completed stage of a program. But it was, let's bring a great team of volunteers, people with great experiences together, and let's see how much we can help these young artists out there that need our help.
When I heard about the Slants Foundation, I was living in Nashville at the time, and I met Simon because he came to one of my meetup groups that I had hosted called Musicians for Social Justice that I just like threw up on Meetup. And this was like right before the pandemic hit that then prevented us from meeting further. But, it was really interesting to talk to him about what he was doing with the Slants Foundation at the time, because I was going through my own internal struggle around really wanting to pursue music as a career, but also feeling like I had a responsibility to my fellow citizens and like to my country, like to kind of do work in like the civic engagement space that would prevent, our country from backsliding off a cliff. Just seeing what they were doing with the Slants Foundation was so inspiring to me, because it's like, I had this thought where I'm like, well, Sumi, you can use art, you can use your music and use that as a vehicle for some of these things and issues that you deeply care about. Like it went from being like an either or in my mind, and I was like split and torn, to like, well, maybe there's an and here. And, there's a way to combine these two passions and into one path. So that was a really cool mindset shift. And I just think that so many of the projects that the Slants Foundation is working on are so unique, and you don't really see many other or any other organizations doing the same thing. So I do think that it is kind of leading the way in that sense.
I think that combining all those things, activism, social justice, music, sometimes that's really the best way to reach people, especially when you're talking about younger people that would want to get involved and are just looking for the right vehicle to be able to do it.
Exactly. Yeah, because music speaks to the heart, changing and impacting, hearts and minds, as they say, versus just policy is really how you shift culture and move things forward.
As we've been able to see lately, we can't really just depend on, policymakers, lawmakers, senators, and people like this to do that work. It really has to come down to the people themselves, the people who are being impacted. I want to backtrack just a tiny bit. Do you want to share anything about Simon Tam's court case, or is that something that wouldn't make sense in this podcast?
I think what's important about the court case is to make sure you take away the idea that it's about the business, which is what the original part of it was. When you create works of art, you want to own that intellectual property, and you want to own that for business reasons, right? You want to be able to market that, and you want to make sure other people won't be able to use that same name to market themselves using your hard work. But to take that away, it was a business is a business. We've seen those with the Washington football team. There are many reasons why a team can change a name. And if it's a name that's offending a lot of people, you can change it. It's a business decision. You make that move and you sell merch, and you sell new merch. And honestly, it's not that big of a deal. But we were intertwined with that a little bit, where it was the activism, but then there's the business side of things. And the most important thing for me with Simon in the court case was that it was about doing what was right at the end of the day, because it wasn't like just because we own the name, we're going to make all this money or get all this extra things out of it. It was really just to say, look, we should be able to decide on our own name and decide on what is offensive for ourselves. The court case itself was decided on free speech, so that became a much bigger situation. But at the core of it, it was still let our community speak for ourselves. And so that was the court case. If you wanted a little more overview, was the use of the Slants as a band name for an all-Asian American band. And the idea that the USPTO, the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, considered that to be racist to Asians because there were Asian members in the band using that name. If it was any other makeup of races in that band, it would have been okay because there was no association of Asians and the word Slants, which could be considered derogatory based on some outdated terms. So for Simon specifically, it was a what's right. And he fought it for that purpose, and he kept fighting it for that purpose. Although at the end of the day, there's free speech aspects. Does the government get to decide what people get to say? And the amount of cases that have gone against minorities in this situation, like minorities who wanted to reclaim a term. And there are LGBTQ communities that were reclaiming terms that the word queer itself has been reclaimed. And now it's widely adopted and widely used. And that's something that most of the time was used against the queer community. And then in the cases of something like this, also used against them to be like, oh, we're protecting you from yourselves. You don't get to use that word. And so that's probably the most important thing to me, because that means Simon took this all the way to the Supreme Court, won at the Supreme Court unanimously to say that we get to decide our own words, our own language, and for our own communities, regardless of the free speech aspect of it. I think that's what the takeaway was, and also the persistence to do that. And so I think that applies to the Slants Foundation and what we're trying to do. It's not an easy fight. It's not like we're trying to generate a ton of money so we can all support the nonprofit industrial complex and all take some change out of it and make it a big business. We are literally just trying to help the community that we are all part of. And it's more than just musicians. We have filmmakers. I'm a filmmaker, and I want to help the next generation of filmmakers too. And so there are projects that are going to come up that we're going to try to go in that route too, and music and art and poetry and all that. At the end of the day, it's how can we support our community and the artists that we all relate to do the next generation of work? And when they don't have access to the resources, how can we get them there? And that takes a lot of persistence, because I'll tell you right now, it's been hard to raise funds. And a lot of times people don't want to give money until there is already money there. And there's a lot of things that are roadblocks that keeps a very volunteer driven organization from getting to the next level. So that persistence, which again, that's how you win a Supreme Court case. You just keep pushing it through. And so that to me is the biggest parallel, is just doing what's right and trying as hard as possible. You may not always succeed, but knowing Simon, seeing how far he's gone with the court case and how far we've gone together as a ragtag nonprofit, it's like, oh yeah, we can do more. And we will keep pushing until we get to that next level.
When Simon developed the name, as you mentioned, he wanted to let the community speak for itself. If the community is accepting of the name and you all are accepting of the name, it should not be a problem for anybody.
And we're not a monolith. So I also, it's not a necessary, everybody should be okay with everything just because one group of community, part of the community is in agreement of it. But it is still the part of having that discussion and being able to have that conversation within the community to say, hey, is this okay? And it tends to be that the majority of the community was okay with it. But when the government is the one that's making the decision on what's okay and what's not okay, that's when the voice is being taken away, because they're not actually asking the real part of the community to say that. It's somebody else taking it away. So yeah, I think it's just important for us to have that dialogue and be willing to talk about it, and not just let some little group of decision makers up at the top, which were not made up of Asian Americans at all, make that decision for us. The people that wrote the I think one of the original things, there was no Asian Americans at all involved. The initial decision that said this was racist, because they made a decision that it was.
You know, it's like you said, it's okay for you and it's okay for certain members of the community, but it might not be okay for everybody. In the same way that using the N-word in songs and within the Black community is okay for a lot of members of the Black community, and other people don't like it. But for a government entity that doesn't know anything about you, doesn't have any representation of your community anywhere, to be able to say, this is not acceptable and we're going to shut it down now, is crazy. That's where the persistence needed to come in, so that Simon could take a stand for you, for himself, for the band, and for other members of the community, and say that this is a choice we made. So until you're part of the band, until you're like doing some aspect of the band or you're part of the community, your opinion shouldn't matter.
And the way the court case unfolded, because being that it's a free speech issue now, it's not just one community, there were wins for folks from the queer community, the LGBTQ community, feminist communities. There were bands that were feminist bands that were reclaiming terms that were used by porn companies, right? Porn companies were using terms that they were okay using, but there were bands that were trying to reclaim it in a punk sense of the word. And they were told they weren't able to trademark those words either, register those words. So it's for a lot of communities. There's always going to be every now and then a case where maybe somebody's going to take advantage of the situation. But again, the community is big. If there's enough people that are in support of a movement, chances are we'll get there first. And in fact, a lot of communities have been reclaiming terms and approaching this from a place of empowerment. So we'll get there before the bad people.
Right. And I've seen that over the years with a variety of terms that really had a very strong negative connotation. And it depends on who's using the term to whether or not it's going to have a negative connotation. But if you take the term and you use it within the community that it was associated with, you can turn it on its ear and make it mean something else. And then it takes the original negative connotation, negative power away from it little by little.
Absolutely. Language, it's fluid, it changes, and that's what progression is. It evolves, and as people with general sense of understanding of context and nuance, we can grow if we allow it to grow.
Absolutely. Sumi, did you want to say anything about that? Because I got a bunch more stuff to talk about, but I want to make sure I ask you first.
No, that sounds great.
So y'all have been pushing the bar for a really long time with everything you do, like the Slants, the band itself, the foundation. Can you tell us what are some of the impactful moments from the Slants Foundation that give you hope for moving forward?
One of the recent projects that the Slants Foundation executed was called Asian Pacific's Radio. And I thought that, helping to connect Asian American artists with causes that they were passionate about that had, some social justice or policy level impact, help them think about how to use their art as a means to further the impact of that cause. So whether it's, to help get the message out or to, go beyond just playing a show as a fundraiser, right? Which is kind of like the standard way that music is used to further the impact of various social causes. But in what other creative ways can art be used and music be used to actually make an impact? And I think just helping facilitate some of those relationships and conversations in music, you get a sense for how most people care a lot, because sometimes when you watch the news and pay attention to what's going on, it's really easy to become deflated and become really kind of like just wanting to check out, like just feel like, oh my God, everything's going to shit. Like I want to move to Costa Rica, right? Like you hear this all the time. Like I was in a cab, an Uber yesterday, and this guy's like, oh, I'm gonna get out of here. Everyone's too, extreme on both sides. And, it's like, okay, common trope, like people who it's easy to get disillusioned. And I think, being part of these projects really reminds you that actually like so many people care a lot, and the impact of policies and the impact of things that we aren't doing, whether whether it's about gun violence or climate change. It's like, these are really real near-term issues that need to be addressed. And if we all just check out and move to Costa Rica, so to speak, like that's not the solution, but being part of this project and seeing how so many people care and are willing to go spend their free time to try to make whatever small difference we as one person, can make. It's really awe-inspiring you get to see like we're all human. Like this is the core of humanity, like is caring about other people. When you break it down to that level, and like it really reminds you like most of us are good people. And a lot of the harm that's being caused right now, I don't want to go off on my soapbox too much about this, but like, are really caused by the smallest minority of people and or corporations who are making major messes of what we have. And so banding together and fighting back together has always been the path for social change and still is. And so I think it's a powerful reminder when you're plugged into the people who are doing the work and we can have hope.
Absolutely. I always want to make sure that people know, a friend of mine had told me recently, never underestimate the power of a small group. There's so much that can be done with just a handful of people, even just one or two people. And it's like you said, the media and news and all that, it's designed to incite fear. It's designed to make people think the world is way worse than it is. There's nothing that you can do. Don't try. You'll be wasting your time. Just listen to the news all the time on nonstop so you can stay updated with what's happening, but don't try to change anything. It's impossible.
Right. And then, not surprisingly, get further and further disillusioned and depressed if you just listen to it 24/7, and then to the point where you have no energy to actually do anything.
It really is a whole vicious cycle. I don't even watch it very much anymore because of that.
I've missed my share of midterms, and I do feel bad about it. And that I feel bad, and so it's more encouraging during one of our sessions that we did for the Pacific's radios. An artist half my age was able to talk about the midterms with so much passion, so much interest. And that to me is very inspiring. It made me inspired. And B, it's also a good reminder to be like, hey, get on it. I know it's not the most interesting thing sometimes to read about the midterms, and it's so confusing to try to read the ballots for some of the midterm stuff. I never understand most of them. But the fact that there are younger people out there that are trying and they actually care, and knowing that, yeah, we are almost taught to think that it's not that big a deal, that those aren't the important elections, don't even worry about it. But at the end of the day, those are the little things that change the bigger machine. So just get involved. And if it doesn't seem like it's working, it's not to withdraw or move to Costa Rica, but it is to then start a smaller group that can make a difference and join up with the groups that are making the difference and trying to support them in some ways. And just seeing we're trying to inspire the younger artists to do that, but to see some of them already there and going further along than I have. Okay, so it's the inspiration is coming back this way, and now I have to do more. I have to step up.
It would be so easy for everybody to just move to Costa Rica if you have the money. This is terrible here, so let's go somewhere where they have everything together. we can't really think of it like that. And I like that Asian Pacific's radio was inspiring people to think about how can we make where we are better? How can we make the community that we are part of and the greater surrounding place that we live better? It's like you said, Sumi, most people are good. So if people just remember that, a lot can be accomplished. And you have to believe in yourself. And I've seen some young people, just like you were saying, Joe, really, really step up and remind me of that daily.
Activist burnout happens too. So sometimes when you've been in the world for a little bit, you burn out, but that's why you need the younger generation to kind of fill in that blank for a while and then take over. But then, once that burnout goes away a little bit, you come back and you try again. Yeah. Need that cycle.
I even get inspiration, I kid you not, from small children. I have a niece and I was telling her, this is, a big problem. I was telling her about some problem in the world and she's like, well, I think everything's going to be all right as long as we try. And I'm like, wow, there are adult, grown ass people that feel like that's impossible. And I'm hearing this from a 5-year-old. Let's take her advice. Yeah. Let's really try to do that. Can you talk to us about some of your most impactful memories of creating or supporting art that carried the message the world needed to hear, as we've been talking about messaging and what people need to know in order to get moving themselves and get involved themselves?
One of the stories from somebody that was involved with the Asian Pacific's radio program and the organization that he connected his music with was called Change the Referee, or I believe it was called Change the Ref. Yeah. And it was led by a father of somebody who was killed in the Parkland High School, or the high school shooting in Parkland, Florida. And getting to see that, first of all, Manuel Oliver was the name of the father, and he came on and told us about the story of his son and the story of creating the group Change the Ref, because kind of a dual meaning. Change the ref as in like, let's change who is in power, who can actually fight to protect our kids and pass common sense gun policy. But also because it was, saying that his son, I guess, was used in sports and whatever, like, it had this double meaning for him. And just the fact that there's so many of these really emotional and powerful and important fights that are going on. And of course, like, our role is like, okay, well, and then the song that was written to support this organization and the message and the music, like, it literally, like, it just brought us all to tears while we're trying to talk about how we change the ref and how we make progress. And at the same time, you're talking about kids being shot to death. And it's like, it's heart-wrenching. Right. And like, so I don't know, just that was to me an example of, where music allows us to process emotions. And when something so unbelievable has happened, like, it's one of the only outlets I think that we have, art is, to actually allow us to carry on, and not let grief swallow us whole. And I think that, Mr. Oliver used art and was constantly, he's an artist himself, and constantly using art and music to get the community together and to make his point and to spread the message. And, it's really like an example of how without art, these messages and this work would be too painful, I think, to carry by itself. That's an example that comes to mind.
Yeah, that's a really strong example. And every time I hear about a school shooting, they're so numerous lately. It really gets to me. And if you're a parent out there, it's really got to get to you, because you think you're sending your own kid to school. What if this was my child? What if it was their school? And I can tell you that music throughout my life has gotten me through some of the hardest and darkest times I've ever been in. And I don't know that maybe I would have been able to overcome those things, but it would have been a rougher road, and I wouldn't be the same positively changed person. So that's the kind of thing that music does for people. And when you combine it with trying to make a difference with something that's it seems like it's just getting worse. Like, school shootings, just more numerous. I mean, that really is the best way to be able to do it.
Oh yeah, or at least a way and a tool and a mechanism.
That was probably the most powerful interview, and it was one of those things where, again, it was hard to schedule. It was hard to get everybody. We weren't sure if Father was going to be able to make that interview, so we were doing the conversation with Dean to start with. But it's one of those moments where a small group of people came together, was able to put together this really powerful moment. And I know that the Father has been doing the work for a while, and their foundation has been doing major benefit concerts and outreach and all that. But for us, it was just to be able to connect with him that one time and have that be so powerful for us, and hopefully our audience, the audience that may have not heard about that particular organization. And so I was very, very impressed, amazed by that coming together. And so that's kind of a standard for us. We're talking about our future iteration of this project and how we're going to hopefully make it better and make it more produced. And I think the emotional part is the most important part. And if we're able to capture that, regardless of if it's just a Zoom call, if it's just a podcast, or whatever it is, that's still capturing power. That's still capturing very important moments. And so I'm using that as measuring stick for the future.
Definitely. I think it's important to stay close to the emotions surrounding how you feel and why you feel and what you're feeling about. Because without that, what is your why? Like, you really got to find what the why is for you. And then you can connect with others. And if they have a same or a similar why, then you can make a difference doing something. And just like with that dad, it just takes one person sometimes. Just one person, a small group. It doesn't have to be a whole lot of people. Going back to some of your own musical origins, I'm always interested in knowing what inspired people to become who they are and to create the way they do. What were the songs or who were the artists that inspired you to create?
I have a pretty simple list. Oh, actually, you know what? I'm gonna just throw this out because I'm a huge fan of theirs. And we were talking about bands that also have foundations that do great work. Tegan and Sarah, they actually have a foundation, Tegan and Sarah Foundation, that does outreach for LGBTQ youth. They're probably doing way more because they're able to fund it a lot better and they have much bigger names involved in nonprofits, foundations. But I'm just thinking of like a band that's relatively, even though they're much bigger, they're relatively indie by standards, and they were a huge influence for me as far as just stage shows and how communicating with the audience, because that's what they were really known for, and they were a huge part of it. Otherwise, I'm going to say Radiohead is my favorite band of all time, and um, they're, I would say, also kind of outspoken in their sort of more political statements and just being a little more aware of what's going on in the world. But those are my two biggest musical faves, and yeah, I like being able to listen to music as music, and sometimes the lyrics don't have to talk about the biggest troubles in the world, but knowing that the artist is aware of it, and there are times where a lyric might be there that is talking about something, but you don't have to think about it. The idea of like you can have it be a processing of an emotion, but you can also walk away and come back and just listen to it as something else that you can interpret a little bit differently, but then have it remind you later on, well, no, this was written during this time and it's about this thing. And you just have that nice, that's the beauty of music. You can interpret it differently each time and based on the memory and how you first heard their song. So I'll say those two.
I don't know, the bands that were going through my head. I mean, Pearl Jam was such a huge part of my like childhood. I think it's because I had older sisters and they would like come home from their like sports practice and make me like give my one sister in particular. I remember like she would make me give her a back massage like every night. And as like the younger like sister who wanted to be in her good graces, I would I would give her a back massage and she'd be playing Pearl Jam and telling me all of like the gossip and the drama from her from practice that day or whatever. And I thought it was so cool to be in on that. So Pearl Jam is like a core memory for my childhood. But it's interesting too, because then I think about it from the aspect like performers, and Pink is really impressing me in so many ways. Like one, she really transformed her voice. She used to just have like, okay, like normal, like Pink voice, like back in the day, 15 years ago, it was nothing really, it wasn't a spectacle. And now her voice, she has put so much work into it. It's so clear and it's this amazing powerhouse. And not only that, but her acrobatics and her like gymnastics as she's like, I don't know if you've seen her recent shows or the documentary that was made of her tour a few years ago, but like she's out there, like flying across the room in cloth and spinning and doing tumbles and turns. And like, it's crazy. And I'm over here like taking my like gymnastics class, trying to maybe one day be able to do something like that. So I think artists inspire us in so many different ways, whether it's like, memories associated with personal experience or something that we'd love to be able to do one day, or the way they perform, and like some, I feel like I'm inspired by. It's interesting because I definitely don't get only having like one musical style that you listen to, because I think genres now are like all coming together because everybody's realizing, oh wait, I like more than just this one, than just top 40 on the radio, or like just jazz from the 60s, like, and I think people are realizing that there is something to be gained from like all genres for fit different moods and stuff. And that's clearly like coming up in the new music, and the Gen Z, I don't even think would relate to like only preferring certain types of music. But you know what I mean, Joe? Like, it seems like everyone's just like everything these days.
I like the weird cycles of like memes becoming popular again. So there's songs that like Rick Astley's and everything. It's like that is now the younger generation, like, this is the greatest song ever. It's not even a joke anymore. And it's like, no, it was never a joke. He's an incredible musician, incredible singer. But it's just like that it's permeating too, because you'll have like TikTok loops where it's just a song in the background. It's like 5 seconds. That 5 seconds stay with your head, and sometimes old songs, sometimes a new song, sometimes a new song that samples an old song. It's just all bubbling.
All kinds of songs. I got a song by Tony Braxton that Burner Boy sampled, and I'm like, wow, I love the original and I love this new one. It's probably will be another 5 years before somebody else do it. So I love that. I love to hear the music that has impacted both of you. And I have seen Pink, not live, but I have seen her in videos and stuff. And she really, she does a lot on stage. She's really talented, really talented. I grew up with her old stuff, but I love her new songs as well. She's just, I wouldn't mind to see her in concert. I think it would be an amazing show. I'd say for me, it would have to be Beyonce's song Black Parade and India Ari's Video. Those are definitely the two songs that, if I'm ever having any kind of a problem, whatever it is, one of those is going to help me feel better. I want to say, yeah, she's got new songs, and older songs are always going to have a special place in my heart. But
that was like specifically that era, like late 90s, early 2000s. I think that hurt, at least when I came across her. I was like, oh yeah, that's the sound. Knowing that like TikTok is bringing songs out, movies bring things out. I just watched they cloned Tyrone on Netflix, and at the end of the movie they had Erykah Badu's the Tyrone song, and she re-recorded it for the movie. So instead of Better Call Tyrone, they cloned Tyrone, and it was so hilarious. And I was watching the actual video again and just laughing my ass off. And I also love that being from the film world too, and just being like, music means something more than what the song itself was, because you can take that, you can extrapolate and interpolate however you want to take the lyrics and replace it into the world, and all of a sudden it gets a new life and then has a completely new audience. Stranger Things did that too with Kate Bush. And it's now brought in a new life. It's bringing an artist that people may not be really talking about, at least current generation may not be talking about, but you're bringing them back. And as soon as they become back, they're in prominence again. Then all the things that are associated with them and what the walls and barriers they're breaking down, that will come back. I do really love that if we're helping artists create music today, hopefully in 50 years when the earth is still around, hopefully these songs can come back and have meaning down the road. And that's just the beauty of creating.
yeah, I agree. And it really can happen, because that song that song was like completely obscure. And then you just heard it on the radio and wherever else you were listening to music. I guess I'm a little older now because I'm talking about the radio. So what would you guys say your advice is for the next generation of artists out there who are just getting started? They're looking to make an impact with their art and their early works, looking at their early works, wondering if it'll have an impact that they're hoping for.
Joe alluded to it in the beginning around, just not worrying, not doing so much like questioning of, am I good enough? Is my stuff good enough? Is my creativity strong enough? Like, I think it's so important just to trust yourself, to make art, to put stuff out there, and to keep, getting better and learning like as you go. And one of my biggest lessons learned is that you can't learn and you can't get better and you can't make an impact if you're trying to do it all in your head or like by yourself. You have to be brave enough. You have to be courageous enough to let your art meet the world and then get that feedback and iterate from there. And which means you're not going to be great when you start, and like that's okay. Nobody is judging you. Like, I think it's to be celebrated that we make art and that we put it out there and that we are committed to a path of growth and learning, and like that's what's going to help develop all of us into our highest potential, and that's what's going to help develop all of us to have our greatest impact. But we can't do it by ourselves. We can't do it hiding. We can't do it in the dark. We have to be brave enough to let it meet the world and iterate out loud in public.
It took me 35 years or 35 years of my life for me to actually go on the road and tour outside of Oregon. And I will say that right now, that fear was one of the reasons why it kept me sort of stuck in the place where I was. And again, like I justified that even if one person heard and it was just my friend, I'm fine with that being the case. So getting past that fear is hard, and it's also okay to have that be what confines you if that's the way it is, because there are artists out there that may never step foot outside of their city, their town, their state. That's okay. If you refuse to do it and the fear is just holding you down the whole time, then reconsider that, because like you're saying, like we have to be able to get past that, because at some point you're gonna want to grow. But to me, the most important aspect of it, and sort of my own experience, is that I didn't play music since I was born. So whatever, since I was in middle school. So for 20 years, I loved playing music. I did it because I loved it, regardless of whether I believed that anybody else would like the music, or that if I ever had a chance of being out in the public world with that music, I did it because I loved it. Same thing with filmmaking. I just did it because I enjoyed it. So I think for all these younger artists that are maybe questioning themselves, maybe saying, well, should I keep doing this, or should I just go get a day job and drop this? Get the day job. I mean, this is the mom side of people talking. It's like, you can get the job, you find success. And I know, Sumi, I think you have a real job. I don't. I am actually a professional slacker and music video creator person, so I don't have a real job. So I do this mostly full time. But you can absolutely go out into the world, find success, but still maintain some of that love for that creative interest, the passion, and just keep doing it because you love it. Don't do it because you think you can make money. Don't do it because you think you're supposed to be a big performer or whatever else. And that's the only thing that matters to me. As long as I keep doing it, you could be 35, you could be 45, you could be 60 when you do your first tour or do your first release into the world. And that's totally fine. And that one song may mean more when you release it at 60 than, stuff you released all throughout your childhood, because those things may not mean anything to you. I just think as long as they keep doing it because they love it, regardless of what the outcome is, just keep doing it.
What makes me sad is to see so many artists with music that they're too scared to let the public hear, and they've maybe got some great songs, some like gems that would actually like impact so many people, and that people actually like would love to be able to hear. But because of our like very human fear of showing ourselves and like showing our creativity, and so many of us, I too relate. Like it took me so long to be able to put music out there, which I only started doing recently. And I think my thought is coming from this place of like, I do wish I had done it earlier, because I think that now that I'm putting music out there into the world is when I'm getting better. And when I try to do it in my head and like self-critique my own work before releasing anything, I stayed the same for years doing that. And no one got to hear that music at the same time. So that's where my perspective had come from.
Can we promote Sumi's like pop star of music coming out? Like, you say that Sumi X, Sumi's pop project. It's amazing sound, and it sounds so like exactly what you would expect to hear on like a pop stage.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that.
I love it. You promote it. Tell listeners about it. That's what the show is
It's
for.
Sumi X on Spotify and all platforms, and XO Sumi X on Instagram and TikTok.
That's your first major release.
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, it sounds amazing. I just
Well,
anybody who will go to listen to it, I'll tell you right now, it sounds amazing. And again, for a first release of someone who's been in the world for a little bit and probably all the fear that we're talking about, all the things that probably kept us from doing this release. It's like, no, you can put it out anytime and it's gonna be worth it.
Absolutely. And congratulations, Sumi, for putting that out there and letting people hear it.
Thank you.
That's dope.
Yeah. Took me long enough.
I love that. There's no age limit, there's no time limit. When you are ready, don't let people make you feel like you can't be ready. I love the advice that both of you have given. Let the love for what you do and what you make and the pride that you feel for actually being brave enough to show it to someone else outweigh the fear. I think that's really important for people to keep in mind, which is, in a nutshell, exactly what both of you said. So I love that. What do you think Portland needs to hear? It could be anything, or just Oregon in general. Portland, all of Oregon.
Eugene, Portland. I would say this right now. I've definitely been in my mom and my stepdad. There's a very liberal background to our lives, and as immigrants, as people who travel the world and seen things, it's like, yeah, we definitely have more of a liberal leaning in the most part. The one thing that when I started traveling the country and touring and talking to people, and through the slants, there was definitely interesting channels of people that were coming up to us because free speech advocates are not necessarily the most liberal of the bunch, and there are also environments where we're talking to people from all over all walks of life. We have to get outside of the bubble a little bit, and I think what we appreciate in the arts and everything else is we can't live in that bubble because at some point it becomes obsolete, it becomes outdated. And that's one of the things where I know there's a lot of talks about Portland right now, and I think of a lot of it as there's pandemic reasons. There's a lot of other things where Portland's having issues and we're trying to deal with it very compassionately. That's what we're trying to do. And that's a lot of times what the people are trying to like mock Portland for, but we're trying to do things with compassion. But at the end of the day, you also have to realize not everything is as simple as, well, we live in our nice little liberal bubble. That's how the rest of the world works, and that's how everything can get fixed. So I just want us to have some context and nuance in dealing with a lot of things in the world, and also realizing that not everybody is how we project them to see, just like people shouldn't be projecting on what Portland's like. So I think what Portland really just needs to hear is that sense of like there is bigger worldviews. We need to be a little more as open-minded as Portland seems. I mean, Portland, Simon and I have a song that we do for this musical project. We are America's whitest major city. I don't know if it's still technically true, but we still are. And that, I think that in a sense is like we can pat ourselves in the back on how like open-minded we are, but we're actually not that open-minded. We have some major issues. And part of what the pandemic and all the protests was like seeing that. It's like, oh yeah, we're not this perfect little city, perfect little world, that we have major things that we still need to deal with. And so I think Portland just needs to be aware of that. We are trying, but we need to try harder. And there just needs to be a lot more work done for ourselves and for the relationship with the rest of the country, honestly. I love this city and I will support the city as long as, I can. So I think it's all about trying to do the right thing, trying to do compassionate things, but also just being aware that it's not always as simple as that.
Just got to be willing to try.
Yep.
That's all it takes. So lastly, where can people find y'all online? If you have an event coming up or you want to promote something or you just want to tell us where we can find you online, tell us everything right now.
Well, I already said mine, but yeah, follow my music journey at XO Sumi X on Instagram. That'd be the best place.
I'm terrible with social media, so please follow the Slants and the slants.org for the Slants Foundation. Actually, just go there. Just go to the slants.org. Don't even need to go look through the Slants, because we're still trying our best to get more positive work out into the world.
Thanks for listening to this episode. Can't bring the community info without the community. Appreciate you showing up. If you want to reach out, hit us up on IG at Boosting Our Voices or at our website, boostoregon.org. Keep doing great things, keep uplifting one another, and we'll do the same. See you next time.